All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. It is Thursday, and we're already in October. Isn't that amazing? Time really does fly. I think we got some pretty interesting stuff to discuss today. I hope you'll join me. I hope you'll take the time to give me a call. I get some comments now and then, not as many as I'd like. I'm always whining and complaining, but I'm going to keep doing this maybe just as long as I keep seeing some growth, and I am seeing growth in my subscriptions. And I think the average viewership is going up slightly. I hope that's the case. I hope that pattern continues even when we have another president, which we will have. There's no likelihood that the current POTUS, the Commander-in-Chief Joe Biden, will remain in office. So I hope that when we see a political change, regardless of what it is, you'll continue to tune in. Also, I do urge you, please do subscribe if you haven't. I just mentioned, want to keep those subscription numbers growing even, albeit, sadly for me, I guess, slowly want to keep them growing. So please do subscribe if you haven't already, and do let your friends know about Halitics if they don't. I'm going to respond to some commentary I've received from two folks, one who I often feature, another I'm not even going to identify who it is, but a friend of mine going way, way, way back who had some thoughts about what I'm doing here. So I wanted to share that with you as well. We're going to begin, as we do pretty much every single show since last year, since it's almost been a full year since October 7, right? And there's going to be a lot of mourning and teeth gnashing from Israelis. And, I understand it. I really do. I can't say I don't understand it. A lot of people that, none of us are true, maybe babies, but we're not really innocent. But people who should not have been killed were killed. And if you want to say blame Hamas, sure, they deserve censure for what they did. It was wrong what Hamas did on October 7. But again, they represent the oppressed. They represent the persecuted. They represent the victims. And it's very, very hard for me to spend a lot of time condemning Hamas. Certainly, I lament the loss of life, and I put most of the blame, nearly all of the blame, on the current Israeli government as well as our current administration for its full-throated, unwavering support, which will continue unless people suddenly decide they're going to do what I ask you to do, which is vote for Jill Stein. Nearly 42,000 Palestinians killed in the Gaza offensive. These are the latest numbers, by the way, from U.S. News and World Report, reported by Reuters. So that's kind of another source we haven't used. Of course, it all comes from the health ministry in Gaza. Yesterday was a very deadly day. I looked at those numbers and I was like, wow, that's a big jump, I think, because I don't keep them all in my mind. But seeing 41,700 and 88 confirmed dead as a result of the Israeli genocide in Gaza seemed high to me. Seemed like we had a big jump, and tragically, yes, yesterday was a very, very deadly day in Gaza as a result of the Israeli military. What does Jill Stein call them? The IOF, the Israeli occupying force. I think that's a very good description. 99 Palestinians killed. So Israel seems perfectly capable of, certainly willing to engage in 2-3 front killing, right? Because they kill most, notably most consistently now for just about a year in Gaza, but have, gone on a wild murder spree in Lebanon, and they also periodically go after folks in the West Bank, that is east of Jerusalem, West Bank of the Jordan River. And we are seeing, of course, the anger, the resentment, and ultimately very impotent rage of the Palestinian people, of Arabs, of Muslims. But it will come out. There will be more violence against Israel and perhaps against Jews more generally. I've not seen any increase in anti-Semitism personally. I haven't experienced it. I understand there are claims of such. Claims of anti-Semitic activities have, as far as I can tell, largely been debunked when examined, even after, in the wake of October 7. But it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me. I was talking to somebody who was telling me that there's been more anti-Semitism. There's anti-Semitism on college campuses. And I always say, well, show it to me. Show me the evidence. Where is it? And as far as I can tell, it's pretty much non-existent. The hatred, the ethnicism, if you can use that word, the religious phobia, it seems to me is pretty much all directed at Muslims, at Palestinians, even though they are clearly the victims. And so there's the numbers, 41,000, at least 41,788 Gazans killed by Israel, and including 99 more genocide victims yesterday, Wednesday. That would be, of course, Rosh Hashanah. Maybe Israel thought it was on the eve of Rosh Hashanah, let's go kill some more Muslims. I really don't know what they were thinking. I also changed the verbiage here just a little bit. Israel and the Biden-Harris administration have killed at least 41,788 Gazans. And I say it that way. I use the active where Israel and Biden-Harris are the subjects now, whereas before it was Israel with the full support of the Biden-Harris administration. I now say they themselves have killed that many because of the story that came out, the article that Antony Blinken deliberately suppressed the report from the U.S. government that Israel is denying aid to Gazans, right? Israel's denying aid, even American aid, humanitarian aid, we've said. Israel saying, no, it can't get in. Antony Blinken suppressed that report so that more American bombs and other weaponry that is used to kill Palestinians and now Lebanese, and also Palestinians in the West Bank as well as in Gaza. He wanted to make sure that pipeline was not in any way interrupted. So therefore, yes, the Harris-Biden administration is also responsible. If you want to see, I thought it was important. By the way, the thumbnail for this program is WTF, what the F, CA DEMS, Cal DEMS propose accelerated climate collapse. And we'll get to that story. I promise you. It's also relates to some of the other points I've made about the need, for example, tariffs, right? That we should use pricing mechanisms, government tax mechanisms, impost mechanisms, call them what you want, to reduce consumption of harmful products, of harmful services, etc. And we'll get into that. So California Dems wanting to go in the opposite direction, use the government to keep fossil fuel prices low, or at least, to be fair, consistent, which is a terrible, terrible idea. We'll get to that. But I do want to, as I always do, feel the need to center the tragedy that is the genocide in the Middle East, and specifically the Israeli genocide in Gaza, the Israeli-caused genocide of the people in Gaza, the eradication of an entire people. So this is a video. This came, I think, from that U.S. News and World Report article that I cited. Actually, let's get this up. So this is a food blogger in Gaza.
In Gaza's Jabalia, hundreds of Palestinians line up daily at food distribution points, desperate for a meal as the war nears its one-year mark. Former food blogger Hamada Shakwara, partnering with Watermelon Relief, now provides meals for displaced children across 8 camps in Khan Yunis. Shakwara says he's using food to tell Gaza's story. Cooking is a global language, he told Reuters. With 95% of Gaza's population facing food insecurity and agricultural land devastated by conflict, aid remains scarce. Even young Palestinians like 10-year-old Renad Atala are using social media to raise funds and awareness, though she dreams of the day she can return to school.
So that's what we're doing. I mean, it's absolutely heartbreaking. Folks are just queuing up for food at all, at any time, any opportunity to get a little nutrients. They're there because their entire infrastructure has been destroyed. You could see the blown up buildings. This is a humanitarian crisis that I would assume would break everyone's heart. And yet we're unprepared. We're unwilling to take on Israel. We're unwilling to take on our own corrupt, amoral leaders. I can't understand. I frankly cannot. I do not understand that. I'll tell you what I do understand. I understand more how the Holocaust occurred, in the last millennium. I get it because I can see the indifference to human life, and it's heartbreaking. And even worse than the indifference, the cause for blood. The insistence by people like Bill Maher, influencers like, news reporters, Hillary Clinton, that this is okay, this is good, Israel's doing the right thing. It's extraordinary. And extraordinary in a really, 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 really bad way. Israel extends evacuation warnings in Lebanon. So we're seeing a wider offensive there. Any hope you might have that things are going to get better, they're only getting worse unless we somehow figure out a way to unite in support of true political change. And that doesn't mean rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic with more seats that say D on the back in blue than R on the back that say red, or the other way around. That's not the change that we need to save our planet, to save what's left of it, to save some decency. That's not good enough. That's not good at all. Only if we start putting a lot of chairs that have green written on the back or something else, W for worker. I'm willing to, look at any option. I was there to do Dem Enter, to change the Democratic Party from within, but we've seen now, really beyond any peradventure, that the Democratic Party isn't changed. It changes. I got this comment, by the way. I do hope you'll join me. 240-242-5646 today, Thursday. I saw this. This was on my Facebook in messaging, I guess, app. God, there's so many different ways to reach out to people, to communicate. Well, there's all this technological advancements. I mean, it's exciting. We could be doing really, really good things. This doesn't have to be a recipe for disaster, but it is. Our technology is often used to kill us, as we saw with Israel planting plastic explosives in cell phones, used to spy on us, used to keep us in line, to dox us, instead of building more understanding, building networks among poor, struggling, and working people to make life a little bit better. And yet we're seeing social media go in the other direction. So I got this comment on these strange socio-political times. I'm thinking of you and your noble endeavors and valiant efforts. A little bit Don Quixote. So yes, quixotic, tilting at windmills are not going to make any difference. Obviously the windmill keeps turning no matter what the knight did. Don Quixote, the knight who really wasn't a knight. He was living past after medieval times, but he went off with his loyal sidekick Sancho Panza, and sometimes he would ride it, or he early in the novel very famously rode it windmills, thinking they were an enemy of some sort that he had to defeat. And of course the windmill, it didn't know anything. It just keeps turning and turning. And kind of like that, I think that's a fair analogy to what I'm doing here. I wish it weren't, and I'm always open. In fact, I plead for your help in coming up with ways to maybe defeat the Leviathan. But but I haven't seen it. I know a lot of you say, well, the way we defeat it is by electing Democrats. I so don't understand that argument. This really caught my attention. Right now, we are watching just how awful the climate crisis has impacted our nation, including in an area where I think a lot of people, including myself, thought was more likely to be impervious to hotter temperatures and more extreme weather. Asheville. But before we get into that, I was looking, I just was browsing through my newspapers online. They're virtual newspapers. And I do subscribe to the Monterey Herald, and this headline totally caught my eye. Bill aiming to keep gas prices lower advances. And that, as you know, anyone who's followed me at all knows that I have been constantly urging, pleading for, demanding, insisting on higher gas prices, that no, prices are way too low. The last thing we should be doing is trying to keep the price low or even lower, make it even lower. That's a terrible, terrible idea. We are in the midst of ecocide. We are destroying our mother. And yet, and that's the direct result, of course, of overconsumption of fossil fuels. And yet people say we need cheaper gas or gas is too expensive. No, the way prices work, the higher something is priced, the more it costs, the less we consume. And any method designed to reduce consumption, which is what, we're all aiming for, right? I mean, that is the idea of Paris. We have to consume less fossil fuels. The idea of the Paris Accords, which I think we signed. I think all climatologists who acknowledge, which is 99.7%, I think, of the climatologists who recognize the climate crisis is real. It's human caused. It's anthropogenic. It keeps getting worse and worse every month for the past 14, 15 months. Has been hotter than the month before. There's no way that's random. That's because we burn and keep burning and burn more and more and more coal and gasoline and natural gas. So the solution has to be to consume less. Now, people talk about things like, well, instead of raising the price of gasoline, let's subsidize clean, green energy. Okay, the way you reduce consumption of a product is either you make it more expensive or you make alternatives cheaper. So that's the theory. But what we've seen with gasoline, fossil fuels, is even when we subsidize, which costs us money, by the way. It's not like when you say, well, let's subsidize wind or geothermal or solar. Let's subsidize it. That costs us money. We have to pay for that somewhere. It comes from someplace. So there's, a choice. We can make alternatives cheaper, or we can make fossil fuels more expensive. But when you make alternatives cheaper, you don't stop people from consuming fossil fuels. They still keep consuming them because relatively they're incredibly cheap. A gallon of gasoline contains an extraordinary amount of calories. It's so energy, dense. Tom Hartman made the point in his book, The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight, that petroleum, coal, natural gas are extraordinarily distilled forms of solar energy. So when we talk about using this energy from the sun today, that's fine, but that's energy that just reaches the earth every second, every minute, every hour. But what's in a barrel of oil is distilled sunlight over hundreds or tens of millions of years. So it's always going to be cheaper if you don't factor in the external costs. So it's not enough to try to subsidize other energy. We must make fossil fuels more expensive. Now, people say, well, it's not fair to poor people, it's not fair to working people. It's true. Relatively, that tax would fall hardest on them. And so we talk about ways to address it. But, and they're very effective ways. They're extremely effective ways. You just provide rebates, and they will be able, poor people, struggling people will have alternatives. But we can't continue to do what we're doing now. We're seeing our planet collapse. We're seeing it. And who's going to suffer? By the way, the same people that those who cry tears for working people who will have to pay higher prices, or poor people who will have to pay higher prices for gasoline, they're the ones who are bearing the brunt of the climate catastrophe. The billionaire class, they're not only causing it, but they're also able to avoid it. There you see Hurricane Helene. That's what was so ironic to me, is you saw this headline in the Monterey Herald at the same time as you saw the caption of this bill aiming to keep gas prices lower. Well, we have Hurricane Helene was a direct result of cheap fossil fuels. So it's totally ironic. It's ridiculous. It's absurd. It's absurdism at, its core. That at the same time as we're lamenting what happened in Asheville, the California Democrats, because it's a triple threat state, right? Whatever they call it, it's all three, trifecta, governor, legislature, courts are all Democratic in California. And they're saying, no, let's keep gasoline prices low. And the way it's presented, I mean, it's a little bit unfair. It's really more designed to prevent price or spikes. When refineries go offline, they have to go offline to clean them off and all that. There are shortages, prices go up, and when you have a lot of demand for fossil fuels, like during holiday weekends, people drive a lot, there can be real spikes. Well, the idea that we're going to level them out, we're going to make sure there's a steady supply, there's always enough, that's insane. That's the last thing we should be doing, Legislature of California. You want to have less and less and less available. I'm kind of with you on the price spikes. That is problematic for individuals and for businesses. The way you address that is you have the price at the pump be primarily a tax. If you had a $5 tax on gasoline, then there couldn't be nearly as big a spike. It can't spike the way it spiked. We've seen prices in California. When I was there, it was over $5 a gallon at one point. Went down to about $3 a gallon, I believe. So that's a massive drop. That's a 40%, if I did my math right, a 40% drop. And then it goes back up. That's over a 50% jump. But if you had a $5 tax, a $2 drop, let's say it was at 10, right? Because there's a $5 plus $5. The oil companies are charging $5. Then there's another tax of $5. So it's $10. Price drops $2, goes from 10 to 8. That's much less of a drop. Not as significant. Goes back up to 25% rise rather than a 60%, 67% jump. So the best way by far to reduce price spikes and drops and all that, the push me, pull you, is to simply have a tax that keeps rising, because the tax is always going to be there and it's going to reduce jumps and drops in price. So if their concern is spikes, that's the way you address spikes. And it also would be the only way that will consistently reduce consumption, which is what we absolutely, without any question, undoubtedly need to do. So let's talk about Asheville just a bit. I was in Asheville not too long ago. Very nice city. Really enjoyed it. Yeah, there's a river. My son was telling me about. He was there just earlier this year, actually. The river goes right through it. And this is from CNN. People moved there to escape extreme weather. They forgot its tragic history. Yeah, because there's a river and that river floods. And why did it flood this time? What's going on? Well, there's no question. It's the fossil-fueled storms, the superstorms we're getting because of ever hotter seas. No one doubts it. Even CNN acknowledged it. It's not. Memories are short, so people think, okay, Asheville's safer because it's in the mountains. It's at elevation. It's far from the ocean. But the reach of the climate crisis, as CNN, voice of the establishment, voice of the elites, recognizes, no, you can't escape it. It's everywhere. For a second, I saw a spelling error there, but it's not. See, North Carolina looks like it's two L's in that little blurb I cut out, but it's really an L and an I in North Carolina when I look at it more closely. But you just barely see the dot at the top. It almost looks like it's one. It's a one solid line. Okay, so very, very deadly storm. CNN reporting earlier today, 160 plus killed as a result. I saw 189. So obviously that is more than 160. That's the number I saw at least. That's what the climate crisis is doing. And the idea that you can avoid it somehow, well, Kathy Dello begs to defer. If you live in a place that can rain, you live in a place that can flood. Why would the California legislature, what could it be thinking in proposing some bill to increase that will lead directly to increased consumption, right? Because sometimes people say, well, you know what, the gas is so expensive, let's stay closer to home. Let's drive less this weekend. Maybe we'll take a train, right? Those are options people have. Maybe we'll just bicycle around. So instead of thinking, gee, maybe we should, if you're the state Democratic leadership, and by the way, they don't have to compete with Republicans. They already win. They win every race. They're in control. They're large and in charge, the Democrats. So you can't blame the Democratic efforts, just lower my mic a little bit there, to competition from Republicans racing them to the bottom. No, Democrats don't have to worry about that in California. They could very, very easily call for efforts to continue or to greatly reduce consumption of gasoline rather than to level prices out, avoid price spikes, keep the price level during high consumption weekends. They don't do any of that. They say, no, we want to make sure there's plenty of gasoline in those storage tanks at all times. It's insane. And look at the direct result of our consumption. A post-apocalyptic war zone. That's Asheville. The solution, it's so simple. And I think this is it kind of tells you how our society, and I've said this before, I hate to keep using the same terms, we've lost our way. We embrace the wrong answers to real problems. We push in the opposite direction. Israel is attacked by Hamas because Israel is an oppressor, persecuting state that keeps its boot on the throat of the Palestinian people, steals their land. So the right response is to say to Israel, you got to stop oppressing Palestinians. You've got to treat them like what they are, human beings with human rights. That's the right response. We should have said to Israel, we're not going to help you kill Palestinians. What we're going to do is take away our aid and support unless and until you broker true peace, true equal justice for all in your area, in your sphere of influence. Until then, nothing for you. Instead, we go in the total opposite direction. We do the 100% the wrong thing. We go 180 degrees away from what's right. We have a situation where gas prices go up on certain occasions. The right response is to keep them high all the time and make them even higher. And instead, the Democrats say, no, we got to keep prices, we got to reduce prices. There was a point in 22, as a result of COVID and as a result of the consolidation of industries, when railway workers had some real power, where they could really leverage the importance of their work to the greater economy, and specifically to the critical nature of their work to the enormous profits that the railway industry was making. They could leverage that to make more money, to demand, time off, paid leave, better working conditions. And rather than embrace that, which is what Congress should have done, the Democratic president should have done, what the squad should have done, they said, oh, you can't strike. So when faced with opportunities to maybe make things a little better, we've seen our government, the Democratic Congress, and certainly the Republicans too, the current administration consistently go in the wrong direction. The right response to Hurricane Helene, to all the devastation we're seeing, is to raise the price of gasoline and to keep raising it, because that will lead directly to reduced consumption. And again, if your concern is poor, struggling, working people, mine too. We have an obligation to rebate the money that is collected in that tax to make sure that the folks who pay it and who can afford it get their money back, which they can use and they will use to start purchasing cheap, less expensive, relatively less expensive energy. And those who consume less will be rewarded. The less you consume, the more money you'll get back that you're not paying out. I hear over and over people say, well, we can't see, this isn't going to matter. The price of gasoline goes up, people still consume. That's false. We know it's false. When price of gasoline in California is higher, it goes down. But the consumption goes down. But take a product like tobacco, perhaps the most, I believe, the most addictive substance there is. You become a tobacco addict, and if you're an addict, you're nervous, you're anxious, you get physically ill if you don't get your tobacco fix. That's not true for gasoline. Nobody gets sick if they don't buy gas. They just might not, be able to drive their car, which actually will make you healthier in the long run. Now, I understand in the short run, we need transportation, we need that ability to get around, and that's government's responsibility to come up with alternatives. But you don't get sick, you don't get physically ill if you don't drive your car. And yet, even with a product that puts such a burden on you to continue to consume it, from the American Lung Association, increasing taxes on tobacco products means fewer people smoke, fewer kids start, more adults quit. Every 10% increase in the price of cigarettes reduces consumption by a very noticeable amount. And not only that, but the money can be used, and it should be used, to make life better. So this is exactly the same with a fossil fuels tax, and also, by the way, with a tax on with the tariffs, right? I mean, it's revenue to the government, which presumably should be used, could be used. It's our government. We live in a democracy to make life better, at least palatable, which it isn't now, for poor, struggling, and working people. We have low taxes. We have very few tariffs. And yet, poor people, it's not like things are good for them. It's not like working people are getting paid a good wage. So obviously, we have to go in a different direction. There's no question about it. We have very low tax on gasoline. Gasoline prices are very, very low already. So the idea that we should try to keep them lower is insane. And it tells you just how wrong-headed, how misguided, how destructive our society is, how we've completely lost our way. Now, I was like, well, again, back to that same old question, when it's so clearly the wrong answer, why would the California Assembly, the Democrats who do recognize there's such a thing as ecocide, as the human-caused anthropogenic climate catastrophe, why would they try to keep prices lower? So one thought, well, I mean, obviously, because they're politicians, they're paid by the fossil fuel industry, they get contributions, and also they're, people, yes, consumers are saying to themselves, this is bad, prices are going up, this hurts me. And it does in the short run, of course, it hurts people. And they may not be able, they're not fortunate, they're not privileged like I am, they don't have the opportunity to think long term, that this is in the end will be better to pay higher prices for gasoline. That's the duty of legislature. That's the duty of leadership, to say, okay, there is some pain now, but we're going to alleviate in every way possible. We're going to have more trucks. We're going to have more buses, clean, green buses. We're going to make bicycles more accessible. We're going to figure out all manner of ways to reduce the need for people to drive their vehicles. We're going to do all of those things, and we're going to send you a check every month so that you can use that money to invest in ways to reduce your consumption. That's what government should do. Instead, they're doing the opposite. They're saying, we're going to keep gas prices low. Why would California do this? Why would California engage in such a stupid, destructive, ecocidal policy? What's going on? Well, another thought I had is, well, maybe it's far away, right? When I lived on the Central Coast, the weather was beautiful. By the way, isn't that weird, those hangars? You'd think this was a story about abortion, but it's not. You'll see in a second why I put that up. The weather is really nice in California. And we don't tend to get, at least along the coast. Now, I know people inland, it gets really, really hot, but they vote Republican anyway, so the Democratic legislature doesn't care about them much. Maybe they just think, we don't have to worry about the climate catastrophe so much in California. We don't have the flooding. Au contraire, early January 2024, terrible apocalyptic floods hit Southern California.
This coming Monday marks 6 months since the historic flooding that devastated parts of San Diego and the surrounding communities. Many people who were displaced are still unable to return home, their houses unlivable as they wait for repairs.
NBC7's Shelby Bremer has the story of one woman who has lost nearly everything.
Week by week, Melody Jackson has been putting her damaged belongings like this on the curb outside her Spring Valley home. For 6 months, she says she's struggled to find housing and contractors to make her home livable again.
All right, so that just one person in San Diego, 6 months later, now almost homeless. I mean, her life has been ruined because of this climate crisis fueled flood in San Diego. And I remember when I talked about this story earlier this year, LA also saw record flooding. So there's no way the California legislature can say to itself, the Democrats, the Gavin Newsomes, can say to themselves, gee, all that flooding, all the death, the destruction due to ever hotter temperatures, well, that doesn't happen in California, so we can keep prices low here because it's not going to hurt our constituents. Well, obviously, it hurt them very, very badly. And again, we heard what the North Carolina climatologist, the state leader in climatology said. Anywhere there's water, anywhere there's rain, you can get flooding. I was going to say, my house is built high on a hill, and we've been getting a lot of very heavy rain, so we don't get flooding. And I was like, you know what? That isn't even true, because I was last year, I think it was, on my knees in my garage, which is underneath my house. I had to get down into the sump pump and start pulling out all the dirt and sand that was clogging the pump, because it stopped the pump from getting the water out of my garage and out of my basement. So my basement was flooded. It's not finished because of this potential problem. So we're not going to finish it and risk that. But again, this is a house that's way up on a hill. It's not like at the crest of the hill, but it's a relatively plateau, flat area, and water, we're higher elevation, so the water runs off of our property in general. But below the ground level, we get a lot of water, and we got flooding as a result. Now, not that serious for us, but obviously, yes, anywhere there's rain, you can get floods.
I was just a nobody.
On January 22nd, Melody Jackson was watching TV with her dog when the flood rushed in.
Water come in.
By the way, isn't that a cute little dog? That was definitely a good call by NBC San Diego to have the little dog in the picture with Miss Jackson here.
Out there thinking that was going to stop it, but it didn't. It just started gushing in.
She grabbed her dog and jumped on the kitchen table to stay out of the sewage.
Scary. It felt like the Titanic, because I didn't know when it was going to stop.
When the water subsided, that's when the work began.
All right, so there it is. 6 months later, and obviously her story is common. It's a common one. These are the fruits, the poisonous, toxic fruits of not our addiction to oil, but the government's capture, the capture of the government by the fossil fuel industry. And we're all the victims of it. That simple. And we're seeing even now, when we, beyond any possible argument, beyond any peradventure, we should be moving forcibly away from it by raising the price. California legislature trying to keep it low. It's insane. It's crazy. I can't have hope when we pursue policies like this. And it seems as though most folks don't either, aren't capable at this point, I think, and I think people are beaten down. I really do. I think at this time, the idea that maybe there's something greater that we can work for, that over time we can make our world a better place, is pretty much gone. I think now it's just a day-to-day life, scratching out enough to survive, hoping that you'll make it through the day, through the week, through the month, rather than what is a vision for a better world. And I hear this from those who support Harris. It's not, she's going to make things better. When you listen to her speak, I don't hear this from Harris supporters. Or frankly, the Trump supporters, maybe they do, because they say, he's going to make America great again. No, he won't. And I actually don't think they even believe it. Maybe some do. I think, again, it's, maybe with the tariffs, my job will be a little safer. I'm less likely to get fired. That kind of thing. Maybe the wall will keep the immigrants who are competing with me and driving the wages down or keeping them level. Maybe that he'll keep them out. I think those are the thought process. Maybe, to give Trump supporters their due, maybe, just maybe, we won't have a nuclear war with Russia. So I think there's some thought maybe for the future among some voters, but I think most of us and those who, support either candidate are just thinking, well, I want things to stay okay for me. I want to be able to make it to next week. Not how can we advance America and really make it a better, safer, juster, and more decent society. I think that's largely lost. All right, I've got about 14 minutes left. I actually was hoping to get some calls. I am going to respond now to Shade on Halitics, which, by the way, if you aren't a member of Halitics, if you aren't in the group Halitics, it's really easy to do. You just go to Halitics on Facebook, just type in Halitics in the search engine. It's easy to spell Halitics. In fact, it's right on your screen. And then you can join. And it's a really great group. I think there's a lot of really good discussion, a lot of ferment. It's exciting. So if you haven't yet joined, do so. Shade took issue with my tariff arguments, as he has been wont to do, as he often does against my arguments for fossil fuels. And to be fair to Shade, he said, I get why you want the fossil fuel tax, but you have to make sure it doesn't hurt working people. And the way you call for these massive taxes, it's going to hurt working people. And, I get that. And I've always said, hey, the money needs to go right back to in the pockets of working people. And then some respond, well, if you're going to give them the money back, they're just going to keep buying fossil fuels. In the first instance, yes, it won't cause a significant drop, but it will cause some, because people will say, well, I just got $1,000 in the mail. Do I want to spend all of that on gasoline, or do I want to try to drive less and use that money for everything else I could use it for? And I'll really, try to drive just one trip today rather than two. And that's exactly what would happen, by the way. I don't really want to get into all the discussion, but you raise the price of something, even if you give people money back, as long as you don't give them the money back that they're spending specifically. In other words, you don't say to someone, you buy more gasoline, we're going to give you more money back. No, you're not rewarded for consuming. You're just allotted a certain amount of money, as is everybody. You're going to get the same amount no matter how much you drive. You're going to start driving less. And very, very quickly. So this is what you don't understand about tariffs and other artificially imposed costs. And the challenge Harris has in explaining them to remaining undecided voters. So here's what Shade says. When she talks about tariffs, because I've said it's not a sales tax, it is undecided, less sophisticated voters that are her target audience. Well, I don't know if they're less sophisticated necessarily. I mean, some undecided voters I think are pretty sophisticated. I don't know that they're less sophisticated. I think she's trying to scare people. I think she's trying to say to people, oh, you're going to have to pay more, you're going to have to pay more, you're going to have to pay more, rather than say, okay, we have a problem with imports. Imported products mean fewer jobs for Americans because those goods are made overseas where a lot of our money goes. So we have to figure out a way to bring the jobs back. Tariffs are the way to do that. They're the most efficient way. You use the market, use market pricing mechanisms. As consumers are confronted with higher prices for imported goods, they will, this is Econ 101, purchase more domestic goods. Yes, it will increase prices a little bit, and we'll get to that. And I've talked about this. Yes, a dollar tariff will increase prices. Dollar per good will increase prices, and not by $1, by less than $1. Just like those tobacco taxes increased the price of a cigarette. But we recognize it's worth it because cigarettes are bad for the individual who consumes them, and the tax on the cigarette can be used by the government to address serious problems, including those problems caused by consumption of tobacco. So that's exactly what tariffs will do. They provide revenue to the government, which can be used to offset the taxes of those who are less affluent, and should be used to do that. And and perhaps, I don't think you need to, but if you really felt you had to, stimulate domestic consumption. But you're already stimulating domestic consumption when you impose tariffs. Okay, so to the pocketbook of such voters, tariffs are essentially a regressive sales tax by another name. That just isn't the case. That's just not true. That's a false statement. It's not a sales tax. Every single item when you go to a store isn't subject to that tariff. Only those that are manufactured overseas or are in in an industry like maybe computers or cars or whatever it is that the tariff addresses. It's not every single item. It's not even every single discrete item within a particular area, like cars. Let's say that there's a tariff on imported automobiles. Well, if the car's made in Detroit, if it's assembled in Detroit, there's no tariff. Let's say there's a tariff on steel. People don't buy steel anyway. You don't go to the store and say, let me buy 20 pounds of steel. You buy a refrigerator that's made of steel. But there's not going to be any added cost to that refrigerator if the steel is domestic made. There might be a slight increase, actually, to be really technical about it. If an alternative, if a competitor's price goes up, then the domestic manufacturer can raise their prices. So there's a little bit of room for them. But this stimulates production within the United States. That's good. That's what we want. I don't know why this is such a hard one for people. Yes, some prices would go up, but I want to respond to that because, again, the revenues, just like tax revenue, you impose taxes, that any tax paid by a working person reduces their disposable income. It reduces their ability to consume. But if you offset the taxes that working people pay with the revenues from tariffs, then they're no worse off. In fact, they're better off because the tariff, the prices of goods never goes up by as much as the tariff, as I've shown in my supply-demand curves. And here's my response, and I thought it was a very good one, so I want to share it with people. And you can certainly see it on Halitics. I highlighted my responses in yellow, Shade's comments, no, my responses are in pink, Shade's comments are in yellow. So there will always be a tension between low prices and fair wages. Right now we have neither. So we don't have prices are high in this country and people aren't paid a fair wage. Tariffs protect better paid American workers compared to foreign workers, but they do result in slightly higher prices. But they also do reduce profits for multinationals, which is very good. We want to reduce their profits. They're exploiting workers overseas. The argument we can't impose tariffs because they will hurt working class consumers could just as easily be used to argue for eliminating minimum wage laws. And that is correct, right? Minimum wage laws mean prices are higher. If companies could pay workers less than the minimum wage, they would charge lower prices. But we recognize, no, you work hard, you deserve to be paid a certain amount, a minimum amount, a livable amount. Tariffs are very similar. We buy goods, we're consumers in the United States, we should be supporting American workers. Domestic manufacturers. There are all manner of benefits from doing that. The money flows through the economy, through our economy. The workers who get that salary at the GM plant or the Amana refrigerator plant or wherever they work will be using that money to purchase items in their local stores, to buy at their local restaurants, to consume at their local restaurants, to pay taxes in our country. That's why you have tariffs. And also to reduce transportation costs and fossil fuel consumption from transit. It's not a hard one. I don't know why, when getting into these, I feel the need to respond because this is the argument that you hear. These are the arguments you hear over and over from the Democratic Party, from the corporate media, from the Goldman Sachs and Wharton economists that Kamala is so proud to trot out, who support her free trade plans. And they're just flat out wrong. So again, from Hal, the challenge that we face, because again, yes, you have the minimum wage where workers get a decent salary. You have a tariff where we stimulate domestic production. There is a challenge. How do we keep prices low? How do we ensure lots of competition between sellers of goods and lots of competition among employers of Americans for labor? That's what we have to focus on, not keeping prices low at all costs. Because if people are poor, low prices don't make things better. They just prevent them from starving. There are other ways, much, much better ways to prevent people from starving. And why Harris doesn't explain this the way she should, and what we need government provide healthcare that would make our industries immediately more competitive. Unions, antitrust, law enforcement, a robust safety net. Why doesn't Harris talk about all this? Because either she doesn't really understand it, which I think is definitely part of it. She doesn't care, and both. I mean, I think those are your answers. It's really that simple. I see you're posting. Then there's issues about, it's true. Tariffs aren't automatically going to lead to much more domestic manufacturing. It takes time. The full destructive impact of NAFTA, of CAFTA, of most favored nation status for China, the day after those laws were passed, our domestic manufacturing base wasn't decimated. It wasn't wiped out largely. It took years. So you're right. But this is how you start the ball rolling. This is how we start bringing jobs back. And since the tariffs do reduce the profit margin for importers, since the tariffs do, on a dollar-for-dollar basis, lead to increased government revenues for the United States, workers are not harmed, ultimately. Because, again, we can reduce taxes on lower-income people dollar for dollar, what's collected by the tariffs, and at the same time, their prices aren't going to go up by that same dollar. The prices will go up less. And here's the supply chain. So the more positive effects of a tariff, especially from a large importer such as China, will not occur until alternate supply chains from other countries can be built out. Yeah, it will take some time. By the way, I don't think the benefit are alternate supply chains from other countries. The benefit is we produce them here. We make those goods here. We assemble them here, as we did. We used to have, up until around 2000, we had a very, very vibrant, profitable consumer assembly and manufacturing business. Dell computers used to be made in the United States until Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, the Democrats pushed through most favored with full Republican support, most favored nation status for China. And then very quickly, it didn't take too long, I believe Apple made computers in this country too. But the lure of cheap labor destroyed our manufacturing base. And yes, consumers benefited slightly, but remember, working people are consumers too, and they net suffered. That's why they vote for Trump. All right, a couple more points I want to get from Shade, and then we're going to call out a show. I've actually been on now for a full hour, so I've done my show, but just real quick. How you seem to hold Democrats to a higher standard than you hold Republicans. I thought about this. I think that's true. I probably do. And there are several reasons for that. One, I spend more time with Democrats, so when I hear their arguments more, and they're so transparently nonsensical that I have no choice but to respond to them. Two, Democrats are more hypocritical. They really claim to a greater degree than Republicans ever do that they're looking out for consumers, they're looking out for workers, and they're not. They're just not. So that really irritates me. And then another reason I seem to hold them to a higher standard is because the people I talk to are mostly, like I said, the people I hear from are mostly Democrats, but the people I talk to are also mostly Democrats, and they're not going to vote for Republicans. And I say, don't vote for Republicans, but just don't vote for Democrats either. So I think that's fair. Now, he goes on to say, by default, unless you can provide your third party with a few $100 million to spend on their campaigns, you're throwing your support to the Republicans. Well, I am opposing the unitary party. I don't see much difference between the Republicans and the Democrats on critical issues. I think I think I've demonstrated that our nation is circling the drain right now. And unless we do something very, very different, we're going down that drain. Yes, money is the mother's milk of politics. And that's why both parties are so bad, in my opinion. But I don't have that kind of money, and I'm not going to spend it. And if I did, I would spend it more on permanent institutions like media to try to move people to the left, which is exactly what I did when I, did invest my own money on the radio station. But ultimately, the solution has to be an informed public that makes good decisions, that votes for the right people, not just the slightly less wrong people. Okay, finally, as I wrote, there's a place for tariffs, but they have to be reasonable amounts so transition is smooth without creating hardships for consumers. Okay, anytime you impose an added cost on an item at any point, whether it's at the point of sale to the consumer, whether it's the point of entry into the country, whether it's during the production process, that's going to lead to somewhat higher prices. But tariffs will have many positive impacts that are greater, that outweigh the harm to poor consumers, because that harm can be not just alleviated through tax offsets or through some type of rebate, but because the rebate or offset available is greater than the tariff itself. So I don't know that we really disagree so much on this issue. All right, that's going to do it. I got through it. It's an hour. I would love to hear from you. I know we can definitely have a back and forth with Shade on in chat, but I much prefer to talk to people, including Shade. He's certainly willing to call. I know he can't often, and I appreciate any commentary, any way to reach out. But again, I want to have that dialogue through conversation. 240-283-7262. Tomorrow is the free-for-all. Don't forget to join me then, and have a great weekend if you missed tomorrow's show.